The high-altitude trade routes connecting Tibet with India and Nepal created unique preservation conditions for travelers who perished attempting dangerous mountain crossings, particularly along the Nangpa La and Drolma La passes, exceeding 19,000 feet elevation. Unlike conventional archaeological sites, these mountain passes contain chronologically layered remains spanning hundreds of years, with bodies from different centuries experiencing identical preservation. The extreme cold creates natural mummification through sublimation, moisture transitioning directly from solid to gaseous state without liquid phase, dehydrating remains while maintaining structural integrity. Particularly well documented is the Pilgrim Cluster, discovered in 1998, containing 22 individuals who perished simultaneously around 1625 while attempting a Tibetan Buddhist circuit pilgrimage. Their arrangement indicated deliberate grouping as temperatures dropped, with peripheral individuals displaying defensive wounds, suggesting conflict over central positioning as survival prospects diminished. Recovered artifacts revealed sophisticated high-altitude adaptations, including specialized footwear combining yak wool insulation with spiked iron crampons, and bamboo breathing tubes designed to warm air before inhalation. Most illuminating are the death texts, personal journals documenting final thoughts as travelers recognize their imminent deaths. These writings reveal consistent hallucination patterns typical of hypoxia and hypothermia, including reports of spiritual figures approaching from the distance and sensations of warmth despite freezing conditions. Contemporary climbing expeditions continue discovering ancient remains as glacial retreat exposes previously hidden bodies, creating ethical challenges as centuries-old human remains emerge with clothing, equipment, and unique preservation patterns documenting terminal survival behaviors in remarkable detail. Among the Yanomami people of the Amazon rainforest, funerary practices developed around specialized neurotoxins persisted into the early 20th century, creating uniquely hazardous mourning rituals. Unlike conventional weapons preparation, funeral arrows underwent distinctive processing, involving the poison frog Philobates terribilis and specific plant alkaloids creating batrachotoxin compounds, 250 times more potent than standard hunting preparations. These Wayamo, spirit arrows, were crafted specifically to facilitate soul release rather than food acquisition. Anthropological accounts document how designated mourners with specialized training fired these arrows into precise locations on the deceased, typically the throat, palms, and heart, creating pathways for spirit departure. The exceptional toxicity created substantial risk for funeral participants. Ethnographic records document numerous cases of secondary poisoning among mourners from minimal contact with arrow residue. Most remarkable was the ritual's final phase. Primary mourners deliberately pricked their own skin with arrow points, inducing controlled neurotoxic experiences interpreted as shared journeys accompanying the deceased spirit. Medical analysis of documented symptoms matches known batrachotoxin effects: initial numbness, followed by sensory hallucinations and temporary paralysis. This practice created measurable mortality among mourners, with some villages losing 3 to 4 additional members during each funeral process. The ritual's danger was considered feature rather than flaw. Posthumous ethnographic interviews reveal participants viewed secondary deaths as evidence of particularly powerful spirits, requiring multiple escorts to the afterlife. The practice diminished after missionary contact in the 1950s, though specialized arrow crafting knowledge remained preserved among designated tribal specialists who maintain these implements exclusively for funerary contexts rather than hunting activities. The isolated Polynesian society of Rapa Nui, Easter Island, underwent catastrophic population collapse between 1650 to 1722, accompanied by deliberate destruction of their iconic moai statues in patterns revealing sophisticated apocalyptic rituals. Archaeological evidence contradicts simplified resource depletion narratives, instead showing systematic statue toppling coinciding with climate fluctuations and European contact. Excavations reveal these weren't random acts but followed precise protocols. 91% of fallen statues display consistent directional positioning, deliberately face down with ceremonial eye sockets contacting soil. Excavated human remains near toppled statues show distinctive trauma patterns indicating ritualistic killing, with victims positioned in celestial alignments mirroring the fallen statues' arrangements. Most revealing are inscribed wooden tablets, Rongorongo script, describing the transition from Moai veneration to the Birdman cult, a radical religious transformation where the island's elite ritualized statue destruction as spiritual technology transfer, symbolically redirecting spiritual power from static monuments to living representatives. Skeletal analysis indicates these victims weren't random sacrifices but specifically selected individuals. Genetic testing reveals close biological relationships between statue carvers and ritual victims, suggesting hereditary punishment targeting specific lineages blamed for spiritual failures. European accounts from First Contact in 1722 describe witnessing final phases of this transformation, with Captain Roggeveen recording synchronized toppling events involving hundreds of participants using coordinated rope systems. This systematic destruction represented more than vandalism, but spiritual recalibration, a society actively dismantling its religious infrastructure when it failed to deliver expected results, creating an unprecedented archaeological record of deliberate cultural reinvention through monumental destruction. The Spanish colonial silver extraction system at Potosi, modern Bolivia, created unprecedented underground death tolls between 1545 and 1825, with colonial records documenting over 8 million indigenous miner deaths. The Mita forced labor system conscripted native Andeans for compulsory 6-month mining rotations, creating distinct archaeological evidence of systematic exploitation. Excavations of collapsed mine sections reveal unique burial postures and formally called tool clutch positioning. Miners found with extraction implements still gripped in skeletal hands, indicating sudden tunnel collapses during active work. These weren't merely accidents but predictable outcomes of deliberately unsafe practices. Spanish mining administrators documented knowledge of structural weaknesses, but calculated that excavation pace outweighed human costs, with one superintendent's report explicitly stating 3 Indians lost per silver mark extracted represents acceptable expenditure. Particularly disturbing is evidence of attempted self-rescue, skeletal remains showing fingernails worn completely away against stone surfaces, with bone exposed from desperate digging attempts. Potosi's administrative records include accounting entries for body recovery expenses, listed alongside equipment costs, with recovery fees prorated based on depth, creating financial incentives to abandon deeply buried victims. Indigenous oral histories describe specialized mourning rituals for disappeared miners, including maintaining small shrines called tinka at tunnel entrances where collapses occurred. Archaeologists have identified over 300 such memorial sites throughout the Cerro Rico mountain, each containing miniature offerings of coca leaves and chicha, corn beer, refreshed by descendants for generations after the mine's abandonment, creating an enduring ritual landscape mapping human sacrifice to colonial extraction. Between 1574 and 1687, the Ottoman Empire implemented a graduated criminal punishment system in marketplace settings, with hand amputation serving as the second-tier penalty for theft exceeding specific monetary thresholds. Unlike European justice systems of the period, these punishments followed precise protocols documented in the Kanuname legal codes. Court records detail specialized amputation procedures performed by the El Kesichi, hand cutter, trained surgical practitioners who used heated copper blades and immediate cauterization to prevent fatal blood loss. What made this system particularly effective as deterrence was the subsequent teishir, display phase. Amputated hands underwent preservation in salt solutions before mounting on specially designed market pillars, with identifying documentation, including the thief's name, stolen items, and precise value of goods taken. These displays remained in place for exactly 41 days, a number with Islamic significance, before ceremonial removal and burial in designated cemetery sections. The severed hand served as a living document of the crime, with marketplace inspectors maintaining detailed registers matching each displayed hand to specific market stalls where violations occurred. Particularly notorious thieves might have fingers positioned in specific arrangements communicating additional information about their crimes. Archaeological excavations near Istanbul's Grand Bazaar uncovered specialized copper drainage systems beneath display pillars, designed to channel bodily fluids away from market goods, indicating the sophisticated infrastructure supporting this punishment system. Court documents reveal that repeat offenders sometimes receive distinctive secondary punishments, including facial tattooing with specialized pigments marking them as handless thieves after amputation. During Emperor Justinian's reign, 527 to 565 CE, Constantinople became Christianity's reliquary capital, drawing pilgrims seeking healing from sacred remains displayed in the city's 463 churches. This created perfect conditions for the devastating plague outbreak of 541 to 549 CE. Medical historians have identified a deadly epidemiological cycle. Infected pilgrims carrying Yersinia pestis bacteria traveled to venerate relics believed to cure illness, then joined densely packed basilicas, where worship practices included kissing reliquaries and marble tomb surfaces. Byzantine medical texts describe the sanctified death. Pilgrims who expired while physically touching relics, considered particularly blessed despite creating immediate contamination risks. Archaeological evidence from mass graves surrounding Constantinople's major churches reveals distinctive plague burial patterns, bodies arranged in radiating circles like petals, with positioning suggesting victims collapsed while queuing for relic access. Emperor Justinian's physician Aetius documented the paradoxical increase in mortality among pilgrims who successfully reached major shrines compared to those still journeying toward the city. Most illuminating are church records tracking donation values from visiting pilgrims, showing how religious officials recognized the pattern but continued encouraging visitation for financial reasons, despite mounting deaths. The Hagia Sophia's visitor logs indicate over 4,000 pilgrims processed through its relic chambers daily during peak plague months, with bodies removed nightly by specialized crews using vinegar-soaked cloths as primitive protective equipment. The practice created documented disease corridors along major pilgrimage routes, with mortality rates increasing measurably in towns situated at typical day journey intervals from Constantinople. Along Brittany's Bay of Douarnenez lie 5 medieval villages submerged between 1170 to 1425 CE due to progressive coastal erosion and sudden storm surges, creating the legend of Cair East, Breton folklore's Atlantis equivalent. Unlike most medieval flooding events, these inundations occurred gradually enough that stone churches remained structurally intact underwater, their bell towers becoming navigational hazards for fishing vessels. The parish's bells, cast from bronze with high silver content for superior acoustics, remain mounted in waterlogged towers, creating a documented scientific phenomenon rather than mere superstition. During specific tidal conditions coinciding with winter storms, pressure changes cause air trapped within submerged bell chambers to escape around the bells, creating oscillating vibrations audible above water. Parish records describe desperate attempts to recover these bells, considered spiritually significant community investments, including a 1368 expedition using primitive diving technology that resulted in 3 fatalities. The recovered logbook describes the divers' terrifying experience of hearing the bells ring while underwater, creating disorientation that prevented safe resurfacing. Local fishing communities incorporated these acoustic anomalies into navigational practices, using the sound patterns to identify dangerous shoals during storms when visibility failed. Particularly noteworthy is the Cartulary of Landevenek, documenting ritual responses to these sounds. Specialized prayers offered whenever phantom bells were heard, believed necessary to prevent drowned parishioners from calling the living beneath the waves to join their underwater congregations. Beyond the spectacle of combat itself, first-century Roman gladiatorial games incorporated sophisticated posthumous punishment systems reflecting complex social hierarchies. Fallen gladiators face 3 potential fates determined by their performance: honorable removal through the Porta Libitinaria, Gate of Death, ceremonial burning for the disgraced, or corpse abuse for the cowardly. Archaeological evidence from the Ludus Magnus gladiatorial school in Rome reveals specialized combustion chambers where select bodies underwent ritualistic burning using specific wood types, oak for higher-ranked fighters and pine for the dishonorable. These weren't simple cremations but carefully orchestrated spectacles. Amphitheater waste pits contain ceramic vessels that analysis shows contained aromatic resins added to pyres, creating distinctive colored flames visible to spectators. Red for fighters who requested mercy, yellow for those who fought acceptably but lost. Most illuminating are skeletal assemblages showing systematic partial burning, specifically hands and faces treated with pitch before ignition, while the remainder stayed intact. Gladiatorial contracts recovered from Pompeii include explicit clauses regarding these posthumous treatments, with fighters negotiating specific handling of their remains as part of compensation packages. The psychological impact extended beyond death. Contemporary writers note that spectators would sometimes purchase ash remnants of famous gladiators, creating an entire economic subsystem around these ceremonial disposals. Particularly disgraced fighters received the ultimate indignity, their ashes scattered in the Tiber rather than collected in memorial urns. Beneath the ceremonial centers of Maya civilization, 250 to 900 CE, natural sinkholes called cenotes served as portals to Xibalba, the watery underworld where rain deity Chak resided. Archaeological exploration of these sacred wells has revealed sophisticated sacrifice protocols preserved in underwater conditions. Unlike popular misconceptions of random victims, sacrificial subjects underwent careful selection and preparation lasting months. Tooth analysis from recovered remains indicates specialized diets enriched with corn and honey, fed exclusively to sacrifice candidates, creating distinctive dental markers. Before ceremonies, victims consumed psychoactive substances including balche, fermented honey with bark additives, and specific mushroom species, inducing hallucinatory states interpreted as preliminary journeys to the underworld. The actual sacrifices followed precise astronomical timing. 56% of dated remains align with Venus's appearance as evening star, considered the optimal moment for communication with Chak. Most disturbing are skeletal indicators of restraint evolution. Earlier victims show evidence of simple binding, while later remains reveal sophisticated hobbling techniques including partial Achilles tendon severing, preventing escape while maintaining walking ability for ceremonies. The cenote at Chichen Itza contains remains of 120 individuals arranged in distinct layers corresponding to drought cycles, suggesting intensified offerings during agricultural stress. Particularly noteworthy is evidence of posthumous handling. 42% of recovered skeletons show secondary rearrangement months after initial deposition, indicating ritual specialists entered the cenote waters to position remains in patterns visible from temple observation points. Following Prince Yaroslav's death in 1054 CE, the fragmentation of Kievan Rus sparked brutal power struggles using selective blinding as political control. Unlike execution, which created martyrs, blinding monks eliminated rivals while exploiting religious prohibitions against killing holy men. Byzantine court physicians brought specialized techniques north to Kyiv, including the hot needle method, heating metal implements until glowing, then inserting them precisely through the cornea, while avoiding brain tissue. This created permanently blind victims who remained alive but politically neutralized, as literacy focused on manuscript reading made blind monks effectively removed from power structures. The monastery of the caves became notorious as a repository of the sightless, housing over 60 blinded clerics by 1112 CE. These monks developed distinctive adaptations, a specialized tactile writing system predating Braille by centuries and echolocation techniques using wooden clappers to navigate monastery corridors. Most illuminating are accounts from the primary chronicle describing how Prince Sviatopolk ordered mass blinding of 17 monks simultaneously in 1097, using different methods on each victim to determine the most effective technique. The monks themselves created a unique choral tradition, the Hymns of the Lightless, featuring complex harmonies impossible to coordinate visually. This community developed such specialized knowledge that, ironically, subsequent princes consulted them on matters requiring absolute discretion. creating a paradoxical political influence for those intentionally removed from power. During the catastrophic plague that struck Babylon around 1830 BCE, the city's sophisticated burial practices collapsed under overwhelming mortality rates, creating a crisis documented in rare first-person accounts. The Babylonian physician Ilubani recorded how the city's death rate exceeded 400 people daily, overwhelming the professional mourners and burial priests essential to proper funerary rites. As cemetery space vanished and ritual specialists themselves succumbed to disease, authorities made the desperate decision to utilize the Euphrates River as an emergency disposal method. Cuneiform tablets describe municipal workers collecting bodies at dawn, using specialized copper hooks, transporting them to designated release points where water currents were strongest. The tablets lament how the river runs thick with our kin and became a moving cemetery without monuments. This practice created downstream cascades of ecological disaster. Contemporary accounts describe fish dying en masse after consuming decomposing remains, followed by bird deaths and crop failures in irrigated fields. Most disturbing were descriptions of riverside communities constructing barriers of woven reeds to prevent floating corpses from reaching their water collection points. Religious texts from the period show unprecedented theological crisis, with priests questioning why the river deity Enki would accept human bodies without proper preparation, interpreting subsequent flooding as divine retribution for these improvised disposal methods. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, 550 to 330 BCE, developed flaying, the systematic removal of skin from living victims, into both judicial punishment and psychological warfare. This wasn't merely execution, but a sophisticated process designed to maximize survival time and public impact. Court records describe specialized tools including curved bronze knives with depth guards preventing damage to underlying muscle, allowing victims to remain conscious throughout the procedure. Persian executioners began with small incisions around major blood vessels, then used wooden slats to separate skin from flesh without causing immediate death. Skilled practitioners could keep victims alive for up to 3 hours during the process. The removed skin underwent treatment with salt and oils before display on wooden frames at city gates or military encampments. These exhibitions, called second faces in Persian texts, included identifying information about the victim's crimes, essentially serving as public service announcements. Emperor Darius I institutionalized the practice around 520 BCE, with imperial archives documenting 37 mass flayings of rebellious populations. So effective was this deterrent that contemporary Babylonian records note entire cities surrendering immediately upon seeing advanced teams carrying the distinctive bronze flaying knives and wooden frames. Greek historian Herodotus reported watching Persian soldiers faint during these spectacles despite their military training, describing the process as death entering through every pore simultaneously. The quest to navigate the Northwest Passage claimed numerous 19th-century expeditions, creating a macabre phenomenon. Ghost ships carrying perfectly preserved corpses drifting through Arctic waters for decades. The Franklin Expedition, 1845, provides the most documented example, with HMS Terror and HMS Erebus becoming trapped in Victoria Strait ice. After abandoning their vessels, all 129 crew members perished from exposure, starvation, and lead poisoning from improperly soldered food cans. The ships themselves broke free during seasonal thaws, creating floating time capsules of catastrophe. When whalers discovered HMS Terror in 1851, they described a frozen tableau of daily life. Officers positioned at navigation tables, log entries stopping mid-sentence, and galley food still in cooking pots. Most disturbing were journals revealing evidence of cannibalism among the final survivors. Cut marks on human bones matching sailors' knives found nearby. The Inuit people incorporated these ghost ships into their oral traditions, describing them as spirit vessels crewed by the walking dead. Rescue expeditions throughout the 1850s documented finding multiple ships with preserved corpses arranged in lifelike positions, some appearing to perform routine tasks despite being deceased for years. The HMS Resolute, abandoned in 1854, drifted over 1,200 miles before discovery, its captain's cabin containing a perfectly preserved body still gripping navigational instruments, frozen in his final moments of calculation. Between the 8th and 2nd centuries BCE, the Phoenician city of Carthage practiced ritual infant sacrifice at a sacred precinct called the Tophet, named after the biblical site where children were reportedly sacrificed to Moloch. Archaeological excavations since the 1920s have uncovered over 20,000 urns containing cremated remains of young children, primarily infants under 6 months old. These urns bear inscriptions to the deities Baal Hammon and Tanit, explicitly describing the contents as molk offerings, a term specifically referring to sacrificial victims. Forensic analysis reveals a standardized killing method. Infants were first suffocated to prevent crying, considered an ill omen, then placed on heated bronze statues with outstretched arms, causing fatal burns before full cremation. The practice intensified during periods of crisis. Layers dating to the Roman siege of 146 BCE contain 10 times the normal concentration of remains. Stone monuments accompanying these deposits depict parents presenting children to priests, indicating these weren't disposal sites for natural deaths, as some scholars initially proposed. Ancient accounts describe the sacrifice ritual's soundtrack. Drums and flutes played at maximum volume to drown out any potential cries. The practice became so notorious that Roman propaganda used it effectively, with Cicero declaring Carthaginians unfit for civilization, specifically because of this ritual, providing moral justification for Carthage's complete destruction. During Japan's tumultuous Sengoku period, 1467 to 1600, rival daimyo developed a psychological warfare technique known as kiriga fuchi, cutting starvation, a method of executing captured samurai designed to maximize suffering and demoralization. Unlike quick battlefield deaths considered honorable, castle dungeons called horowanagura, chambers of wasting, were constructed with specific architectural elements to enhance prisoner torment. These cells featured small windows positioned so captives could smell food preparation and hear feasting in nearby halls. Water was provided in minuscule amounts, enough to prolong life but maximize thirst. At Tsunemata Castle, archaeologists discovered prisoner chambers with floors sloped toward the center, forcing weakened captives to expend energy constantly to avoid sliding into accumulated waste. Excavated remains show teeth with distinctive grooves from attempting to consume wooden support beams. Most remarkable are the Kirasute Nikki, discarded diaries, wall inscriptions documenting prisoners' psychological deterioration. These writings progress from structured poetry to increasingly disjointed thoughts, with final entries often consisting of single characters scrawled near floor level, where prisoners collapsed. Analysis of skeletal remains indicates death typically occurred after 18 to 24 days, with evidence of attempted self-amputation in some cases. Desperate attempts to consume their own flesh to survive longer than their captors anticipated. Between 800 BCE and 200 CE, Celtic tribes across northern Europe practiced ritual sacrifice in peat bogs, waterlogged environments whose unique chemistry preserved victims in extraordinary detail. These sacrificial victims, known today as bog bodies, often exhibit remarkably preserved skin, internal organs, and even facial expressions due to the anaerobic, acidic conditions that prevent normal decomposition. Particularly famous examples like Lindo Man, England, and Tollen Man, Denmark, reveal standardized methods of ritual killing, a triple death involving strangulation, throat slitting, and drowning. The victims were carefully selected. Isotope analysis indicates many were high-status individuals from distant communities, not local criminals. Before sacrifice, these individuals consumed specific ritual meals containing mistletoe, fungi with hallucinogenic properties, and charred grains. Pollen analysis from their stomach contents reveals these sacrifices typically occurred during seasonal transitions, particularly the Samhain festival marking summer's end. Celtic manuscripts describe these victims as messengers to underworld deities, specially chosen to carry requests for fertility or military victory. Perhaps most chilling is evidence suggesting some victims remained conscious during their submersion, Several bog bodies show hand positions consistent with attempted self-extraction from the suffocating peat, indicating they were alive when committed to the bog's depths. New Zealand's North Island contains a network of limestone caves that earned macabre significance during the Intertribal Musket Wars, 1818 to 1839. Maori warriors preserved the tattooed heads, moko mokai, of defeated enemies through a smoking preservation process, then placed them in specific caves where unique acoustic properties created haunting sounds. These caves, known as anatangi, crying caves, feature narrow chimney formations that transform normal wind patterns into wailing sounds resembling human cries. British colonial records describe the caves producing the most dreadful lamentations as if hundreds suffered in agony. The preserved heads weren't merely trophies, they served spiritual purposes. Maori believed the heads retained mana, spiritual power, that could be harnessed by the victorious tribe. The cave's natural acoustics were enhanced by strategic placement of the heads near specific resonant chambers where air currents would pass through the dried nasal and throat passages of the preserved remains, creating fluctuating tones. The practice became so feared that enemy warriors would sometimes disfigure their own fallen comrades. To prevent this posthumous fate, when missionary Samuel Marsden visited in 1820, he reported local inhabitants refusing to approach within half a mile of these caves after sunset, believing the wailing sounds could lure the living to join the dead. From 1430 to 1490, Scotland's noble houses engaged in a lethal practice that combined hospitality with assassination. Court records detail the creation of inheritance cups, Kurt Endechi in Kurchar A and Shapra A, Endechi, ornate drinking vessels with compartments containing arsenic, belladonna, or more exotic toxins gathered from North African trade routes. These chalices were designed with intricate internal chambers that released poison gradually during consumption, ensuring the victim's departure occurred well after the feast ended. The most sophisticated vessels incorporated wax seals that dissolved only after several minutes of contact with wine, allowing hosts to drink safely from the same vessel before passing it to intended victims. Medical manuscripts from Edinburgh describe the wasting illness of the lords, characterized by progressive hair loss, fingernail shedding, and cognitive deterioration, all classic symptoms of heavy metal poisoning. Queen Mary's physician recorded treating 14 noblemen between 1470 and 1482 for these mysterious ailments, unaware of their true cause. The Campbell clan became particularly notorious for this practice, with 5 documented cases of rival clan chiefs perishing within weeks of attending their feasts. The practice became so widespread that by 1492, King James IV issued a royal decree requiring noble houses to exchange cupbearers during formal gatherings, effectively ending the era of the poisoned chalice. Beneath the organized streets of the sophisticated Harappan civilization, 2600 to 1900 BCE, lie disturbing evidence of ceremonial violence. In 1926, archaeologists excavating the ancient city uncovered a series of circular pits measuring 6 to 8 feet in diameter, filled with systematically dismembered human remains. Unlike typical burial practices of the period, these skeletons showed distinctive patterns of post-mortem processing. Long bones deliberately shattered mid-shaft, skulls separated from bodies, and vertebrae meticulously disarticulated. Most disturbingly, microscopic analysis of the bone surfaces revealed cut marks consistent with defleshing techniques. Researchers have identified over 20 such pits throughout the city, containing remains of approximately 300 individuals, predominantly young adults between 18 and 35 years old. Isotope analysis indicates these victims weren't local residents but outsiders, possibly war captives or sacrificial subjects. The ritualistic arrangement of the remains, limbs carefully sorted by type and direction, suggests these were not hasty mass graves but methodical ceremonial deposits. Copper artifacts found alongside the remains bear symbols corresponding to specific Harappan deities associated with death and rebirth. Some scholars propose these pits served as offerings during periods of environmental stress, as they correlate with evidence of severe drought conditions in the region. The ancient city of Palmyra in Syria became renowned not just for its stunning architecture, but for its sophisticated funerary practices during the 2nd century CE. Wealthy Palmyrene families constructed elaborate tower tombs and underground hypogea with ingenious protective measures. The most striking feature of these tombs were the curse tablets, limestone inscriptions warning potential grave robbers of supernatural retribution. Written in Aramaic, these tablets threaten violators with blindness from the gods and eternal torment in the afterlife. Archaeological evidence suggests these weren't empty threats. Excavations have uncovered skeletons crushed beneath massive stone blocks, victims of mechanical traps triggered by tomb intrusion. One particularly notorious tomb contained a narrow corridor with pressure-sensitive floor tiles connected to counterweights in the ceiling. The remains of 3 separate intruders were found at this location, their bones shattered by the stone mechanisms designed to protect the deceased's journey to the afterlife. Roman-era documents reference these sleeping guardians of Palmyrene tombs, indicating their deadly reputation spread throughout the ancient world. Even after 2 millennia, some intact mechanisms remain too dangerous for archaeologists to fully dismantle.